What if I told you that the most powerful nation on earth just surrendered in a war that lasted only weeks and nobody in the mainstream media is willing to say it out loud? What if I told you that on a single Monday in April, the President of the United States went from threatening to wipe an entire civilization off the face of the earth to accepting his enemy's demands by nightfall? And what if I told you that this defeat is so catastrophic, so far reaching, that it will reshape the entire global order for generations to come? Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind. Right now, at this very moment, the world is witnessing something that historians will study for centuries. The American empire has suffered what may be its greatest foreign policy disaster ever recorded, greater than Vietnam, greater than Iraq, greater than Afghanistan. And the truly terrifying part is that most people have no idea it even happened because the media is too afraid to tell you the truth. If you are captivated by the hidden truths of global power and want to see more revelations about what is really happening behind closed doors, smash that like button and let the world know you are watching. Every click helps expose the stories they do not want you to hear. Now, let me take you inside the most important 72 hours in modern geopolitical history, because what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you understand America's place in the world. On Monday, April 6, 2025, President Donald Trump woke up and did something that sent shockwaves through every intelligence agency on the planet. He posted a message on Truth Social that was so extreme, so unhinged, that diplomats around the world thought they were watching the beginning of World War III. He threatened to annihilate Iranian civilization forever. Think about those words for a moment. Not defeat Iran, not punish Iran, annihilate Iranian civilization forever. This was the language of genocide. This was the kind of rhetoric you expect from history's greatest monsters, not from an American president. But here is what nobody understood at the time: that genocidal threat was not a sign of strength, it was a sign of pure, unadulterated desperation. Trump was not threatening Iran because he was winning. He was threatening Iran because he had already lost and he knew it. He was hoping, praying that the Iranians would be so terrified by his words that they would surrender before he had to admit the truth to the American people. And then something extraordinary happened. By that same evening, just hours after threatening to destroy an entire nation, Trump posted again, but this time the tone was completely different. This time he announced a ceasefire, and not just any ceasefire, a ceasefire based on Iran's 10-point plan. Let me repeat that because I need you to understand the magnitude of what occurred. The President of the United States went from threatening genocide in the morning to accepting his enemy's demands by nightfall. In a single day, he went from fire and fury to total capitulation. Now, you might be asking yourself, what exactly is this 10-point plan and why does it matter so much? Stay with me because this is where the story gets truly shocking. You see, there were two plans on the table when this war began. The first was America's 15-point plan, which contained all of our maximalist demands: regime change in Tehran, the complete elimination of Iran's nuclear enrichment capability, the destruction of all Iranian ballistic missiles, and the severing of Iran's ties to Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. These were the goals we went to war to achieve. The second plan was Iran's 10-point plan, which contained all of their maximalist demands. And when I tell you what those demands include, you will understand why this is the most humiliating defeat in American military history. Iran's plan calls for the United States to remove all military forces from the entire Middle East region. It demands that America never again threaten Iranian sovereignty. It requires the lifting of all sanctions, and most importantly, it establishes Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, the most strategically vital choke point on the planet through which 20% of the world's oil flows every single day. And President Trump said yes. He said this plan provides a workable basis for an agreement. He said almost all points of contention have been resolved. The president of the United States looked at Iran's list of demands and essentially said, "We accept." But here is the part that makes this even more disturbing. And I need you to pay close attention because what I am about to reveal explains everything that has happened since. There is no ceasefire. That is right. Despite all the victory laps, despite all the claims of success, despite Pete Hegseth reading out casualty numbers like a scoreboard, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. The only ships getting through are the ones Iran decides to let through. The Iranians have refused to open that strait until Israel stops attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Israel has refused to stop. So while America claims victory, the global economy continues to strangle, oil prices continue to climb, and the world inches closer to a depression that could make the 1930s look like a minor inconvenience. This is the reality that nobody in Washington wants you to understand. Now, let me tell you how we got here. Because the story of America's defeat in Iran is really the story of how one man's ego led the most powerful nation on earth straight off a cliff. On February 28, 2025, President Trump made the decision to launch a massive air campaign against Iran. The goal was simple in theory: use overwhelming American air power to destroy Iran's military infrastructure, topple the regime, and install a government that would do whatever Washington commanded. It was supposed to be quick. It was supposed to be decisive. It was supposed to be the ultimate demonstration of American power. There was just one problem. There was no plausible theory of victory. You see, there is an entire body of literature in international relations that addresses exactly this question. Can you use air power alone to achieve regime change? And the answer, confirmed by decades of research and historical evidence, is an unequivocal no. It has never worked. It will never work. The idea that you can bomb a country into submission without putting boots on the ground is a fantasy that has been disproven time and time and time again. But Trump did not listen to the experts. He did not listen to his own advisors. According to reporting from the New York Times, almost everyone in the national security establishment was skeptical of this plan. The head of the CIA had doubts. The vice president had doubts. Career military officers had doubts. But Trump pushed forward anyway because two people convinced him it would work: Benjamin Netanyahu and David Barnea, the head of Mossad. Stay with me because this is where the story takes its most explosive turn. And by the end of this, you will understand why U.S.-Israeli relations may never recover from what has happened. Netanyahu and Barnea promised Trump a quick and decisive victory. They painted a picture of Iranian weakness. They described a regime on the verge of collapse that would crumble at the first sign of American force. They told Trump exactly what he wanted to hear, and Trump, who fancies himself a genius deal maker with an instinct for winning, bought it completely. But here's what Netanyahu and Barnea did not tell him. Iran had been preparing for this moment for 40 years. They had built a missile arsenal so vast, so sophisticated, that even America's vaunted air defenses could not stop it. They had developed the capability to shut down the Strait of Hormuz within hours. They had cultivated relationships with proxy forces across the entire region who could strike American targets from a dozen different directions simultaneously. And most importantly, they understood something that America's leaders failed to grasp. In a war of attrition, geography always wins. Iran sits at the crossroads of global energy supplies. It can inflict catastrophic economic damage on the entire world simply by existing in a state of conflict. America, for all its military might, cannot bomb its way out of that reality. So, what happened when the bombs started falling? Within the first week, Iran demonstrated capabilities that shocked American military planners. Their ballistic missiles overwhelmed defensive systems. Their drones operated in swarms that proved nearly impossible to intercept. Their cyber attacks disrupted communications and logistics across the entire theater of operations, and their closure of the Strait of Hormuz sent oil prices skyrocketing to levels not seen since the 1970s energy crisis. But the real devastation was not in Iran, it was everywhere else. When 20% of the world's oil supply suddenly becomes unavailable, the consequences ripple outward like a tsunami. Within days, gas prices in America doubled. Within weeks, inflation spiraled out of control. Supply chains that had barely recovered from the pandemic collapsed again. Stock markets around the world entered free fall. And here is the detail that truly captures the scale of this disaster. The United States had 13 military bases in the Persian Gulf region before this war began. 13. According to the New York Times, every single one of those bases has now been either destroyed or badly damaged. Every single one. America's ability to project power in the most strategically vital region on Earth has been effectively eliminated. Now, I want you to think about what that means for the future, because the implications extend far beyond this single conflict. Those bases did not just house troops, they housed intelligence operations, they housed diplomatic missions, they housed the infrastructure of American influence that has dominated the Middle East since World War II. And now they are gone, not damaged, not degraded, gone. The question now is whether the Gulf states that hosted those bases will even want America to come back. Think about it from their perspective. They allowed the United States to use their territory. They became targets for Iranian retaliation. They watched their economy suffer as the strait closed. And what did they get in return? A front row seat to American defeat. Do you think Saudi Arabia is eager to host another American base after watching this unfold? Do you think the UAE wants to paint a target on its back again? Do you think Kuwait or Bahrain or Qatar will rush to invite American forces back, knowing that next time the consequences could be even worse? The American security umbrella that has protected these nations for decades has been revealed as an illusion, and once that illusion shatters, it cannot easily be rebuilt. But the damage does not stop there, and this is where the story becomes truly alarming for anyone who cares about global stability. Stay with me, because what comes next will help you understand why world leaders are privately panicking right now. The war in Iran has exposed something that American strategists have desperately tried to hide for years. The United States can no longer fight and win a conventional war against a determined regional power. Not because America lacks weapons, not because America lacks technology, but because the nature of modern warfare has fundamentally changed and America's military doctrine has not kept up. Consider what happened during the rescue operation for the downed American pilot. In a single day, the United States lost more aircraft than it has lost on any day since the Vietnam War. Let that sink in for a moment. Since Vietnam, more than 50 years of military operations around the globe, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and never, not once, did America lose as many aircraft in a single day as it lost in this one rescue mission. This is not the story of a superpower crushing a weaker opponent. This is the story of a superpower discovering that its opponents have learned how to fight back effectively. And here is what makes this even more concerning. The weapons Iran used are not unique to Iran. The drones, the missiles, the electronic warfare systems, these are technologies that are proliferating across the globe. China has them, Russia has them, North Korea has them, and increasingly non-state actors have access to them as well. What America experienced in Iran is a preview of what any future conventional conflict will look like, and it raises a terrifying question that defense planners are only now beginning to grapple with. If America cannot achieve victory against Iran, a country with an economy smaller than many American states, what happens when the opponent is China? But let me bring this back to the present moment, because right now there is a frantic effort underway to prevent this disaster from becoming even worse. And at the center of that effort is someone you might not expect. JD Vance. Now, I know what you might be thinking. The vice president, the man who stood on stage in Munich and lectured Europeans about their failures, the man who has been one of the most vocal critics of foreign entanglements. Yes, that JD Vance, because here is what the Trump administration has finally realized. Someone competent needs to handle these negotiations, someone who understands that America's position is untenable, someone who is willing to make the concessions necessary to get the strait open before the global economy collapses completely. Steve Witkoff has failed. Jared Kushner has failed. Their incompetence has been demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt. They led us into this disaster and they have no idea how to lead us out. So now Vance is being sent to clean up the mess. And the entire world is watching to see if he can succeed where everyone else has failed. But here is the bitter irony that Vance must be contemplating right now. If he succeeds in ending this war, if he negotiates the surrender that America so desperately needs, he will be blamed for it. The neoconservatives who dominate the Republican foreign policy establishment will never forgive him for acknowledging defeat. They will attack him relentlessly. They will claim that he gave away the store. They will say that if only America had stayed the course, victory was just around the corner. This is the political trap that anyone who ends a losing war must face. The Hawks never accept responsibility for starting the disaster. They only blame whoever has the courage to end it, and yet Vance may be the only hope we have, because the alternative is unthinkable. Let me tell you what happens if this war continues. And I need you to understand that I'm not exaggerating when I describe the potential consequences. The global economy runs on oil. Despite all the talk of green energy and renewable transitions, the cold hard fact is that modern civilization cannot function without fossil fuels. And a significant portion of those fossil fuels flow through the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, that strait is effectively closed. Only the ships Iran chooses to permit are getting through. Every day this continues, the pressure on the global economy intensifies. Already we are seeing shortages. Already we are seeing inflation. Already we are seeing the early signs of economic collapse in vulnerable nations. If this continues for months rather than weeks, we are looking at a genuine possibility of a global depression, not a recession, a depression, the kind of economic catastrophe that reshapes nations and topples governments, the kind that leads to famines and social unrest and mass migration. The Chinese understand this. That is why they have been pressuring Iran to come to the negotiating table. The Russians understand this. That is why they have been working behind the scenes to facilitate a settlement. Even nations that might otherwise benefit from American weakness understand that a global depression would hurt everyone. This is why the desperation in Washington is so palpable. This is why Trump went from threatening genocide to accepting enemy terms in a single day. Because the people who actually understand what is happening know that the alternative to surrender is catastrophe. Now, I want to talk about what this means for Israel. Because if America has suffered a defeat in this war, Israel has suffered something far worse. Remember, it was Israel that led America into this conflict. It was Netanyahu and his intelligence chief who convinced Trump that victory would be quick and easy. It was Israeli hubris that assured American leaders that Iran would collapse at the first show of force. And now Israel must face the consequences of being catastrophically wrong. Before this war, Israel could claim to be the dominant military power in the Middle East. It had the backing of the world's sole superpower. It had freedom of action to strike its enemies whenever and wherever it chose. It could bomb Syria. It could assassinate Iranian scientists. It could attack Hezbollah convoys, and nobody could stop it. That era is over. Iran has demonstrated that it can strike Israel directly, and there is nothing Israel can do to prevent it. Iranian missiles have hit Israeli territory. Iranian drones have penetrated Israeli airspace. The vaunted Iron Dome, which Israel has promoted as an impenetrable shield, has been revealed as anything but. And here is the truly terrifying part for Israeli strategic planners. Iran still has thousands of missiles left. The war has not depleted their arsenal. If anything, it has demonstrated to the world that Iran possesses capabilities that far exceed what intelligence agencies had estimated. So now Israel faces a choice. It can accept a new reality in which Iran is a permanent constraint on Israeli freedom of action, or it can contemplate the unthinkable. I need you to understand what I'm about to say because it represents perhaps the greatest danger emerging from this conflict. There are voices in Israel arguing that the only way to eliminate the Iranian threat is through nuclear weapons, not threats, not posturing, actual use. Israel has never officially acknowledged its nuclear arsenal, but everyone in the intelligence community knows it exists. And everyone knows that Israel has leaders who are ruthless enough to use it. Netanyahu and his coalition partners have already demonstrated their willingness to engage in what many observers consider genocide in Gaza. They have killed tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians. They have destroyed hospitals and schools and refugee camps. They have created conditions of famine and disease that will kill many more. If leaders are willing to do that, are they willing to launch a nuclear strike against Iran? The answer, I fear, is yes. This is the nightmare scenario that keeps military planners awake at night. A cornered Israel facing what it perceives as an existential threat, deciding that conventional options have failed and reaching for the ultimate weapon. And here is what makes this even more dangerous. Israel genuinely believes its own rhetoric about Iran. After 40 years of describing Iran as the second coming of Nazi Germany, Israeli leaders have convinced themselves that Tehran is determined to acquire nuclear weapons and use them to destroy the Jewish state. They believe Iran cannot be deterred. They believe Iran is irrational. They believe that waiting for Iran to develop nuclear capabilities means waiting for a second Holocaust. These beliefs are wrong. Iran has shown no interest in actually using nuclear weapons. Iran's leaders are not suicidal. They understand that any attack on Israel would result in their complete destruction, but Israeli leaders do not see it that way. And that disconnect between reality and Israeli perception creates a risk of catastrophic miscalculation that could engulf the entire region in nuclear fire. Now, let me turn to the broader question of what this defeat means for America's position in the world, because the consequences extend far beyond the Middle East. Before this war began, America's global standing was already severely damaged. The Trump administration's approach to international relations had alienated allies across the globe, threatening to invade Greenland, talking about making Canada the 51st state, treating NATO partners with undisguised contempt, undermining international institutions and ignoring international law. But there was still a belief, however strained, that when push came to shove, America remained the indispensable power, that American military might could still back up American diplomatic demands. The crossing America meant facing consequences that no nation could afford. That belief has now been shattered. The world has watched America threaten genocide and then capitulate within hours. The world has watched America's military bases be destroyed one by one. The world has watched America fail to keep open a strait that its Navy was supposed to dominate. What message does that send to Beijing? What message does that send to Moscow? What message does that send to every nation that has been calculating whether to align with America or hedge its bets? The message is clear. American power has limits. American threats can be ignored. American protection can no longer be counted upon. This will reshape international politics for decades to come. Nations that previously relied on American security guarantees will begin seeking alternatives. Nations that feared American retaliation will grow bolder. The entire architecture of American hegemony, built over 80 years since World War II, has been fundamentally weakened. And here is what makes this particularly devastating for the Trump presidency specifically. Trump's entire political brand was built on the idea of strength. He presented himself as the tough guy who would make America respected again. He mocked previous presidents for weakness. He promised that under his leadership, America would never back down, never lose, never be humiliated. And now he has presided over perhaps the most humiliating defeat in American military history. You cannot spin this. You cannot put lipstick on this pig. You cannot declare victory when everyone can see you have lost. The Tucker Carlsons and the Alex Joneses and the Candace Owenses, the voices that championed Trump when he promised no more forever wars, have turned on him. They see what has happened. They know that Trump did exactly what he promised he would never do. He started a war he could not win. And Trump, being Trump, has responded by attacking them. He is at war with his own base. He is attacking the very people who put him in office because he cannot accept that he made a catastrophic mistake. And this is the personality flaw that has defined Trump's entire life. He never admits error. He never accepts responsibility. He never acknowledges that anything he does could be wrong. And in politics, you can often get away with that. You can blame the media, you can blame your enemies, you can change the subject and hope people forget, but you cannot do that when the price of oil is double what it was. You cannot do that when people cannot afford to fill their gas tanks. You cannot do that when the economic consequences of your failure are felt in every household in America. The next 2 years and 9 months of this presidency are going to be extraordinarily dangerous because a wounded Trump, a humiliated Trump, a Trump who cannot accept what has happened, is capable of almost anything. Now, let me talk about what this means for NATO, because the alliance that has been the cornerstone of Western security for 75 years may not survive what comes next. Trump needs a scapegoat. He always needs a scapegoat. And since he cannot blame Netanyahu, since he cannot blame his own advisors, he is going to blame the Europeans. You can already see this narrative taking shape. The Europeans failed to support us. The Europeans did not send their navies to help break the strait. The Europeans are responsible for our defeat. This is, of course, nonsense. The Europeans warned against this war. They did not want it. They knew it would be a disaster. But Trump will blame them anyway because that is what Trump does. And European leaders who have already endured years of American contempt will have to decide how much more they are willing to take. Here is the fundamental problem. The entire premise of NATO has been that America provides security for Europe in exchange for European alignment with American interests. That bargain only works if American security guarantees are credible. And after what has happened in Iran, those guarantees are not credible anymore. If America cannot keep open the Strait of Hormuz, how is it going to defend the Suwalki Gap? If America cannot defeat Iran, how is it going to deter Russia? If American bases can be destroyed with impunity, what good are American troops in Poland or Germany or the Baltic states? These are the questions European leaders are asking themselves right now, and they do not have good answers. The likely outcome is a Europe that increasingly goes its own way, not a formal break with NATO, not an official declaration that the alliance is over, but a quiet distancing, a recognition that Europe must develop its own capabilities, a understanding that American leadership can no longer be trusted. This is in many ways what realists like myself have been advocating for years. Europe should take responsibility for its own security. Europe should not depend on American protection. Europe should develop the military capabilities necessary to defend itself. But there is a difference between choosing that path and being forced onto it by American failure. A Europe that deliberately builds its own security architecture over time can do so in an orderly, strategic manner. A Europe that suddenly finds American protection evaporating must scramble to fill the gap, and that scramble creates dangers of its own. Now, let me talk about what all of this means for Ukraine, because the war that has dominated European security concerns for the past 3 years is about to be profoundly affected by what has happened in Iran. Before February 28th, there was still hope, however faint, that Ukraine might achieve something resembling a favorable outcome. Western weapons were flowing, Ukrainian forces were holding. The Russian advance was slow and costly. That hope is now essentially gone. The United States has expended enormous quantities of weapons and munitions in the Iran campaign, missiles that could have gone to Ukraine, artillery shells that could have gone to Ukraine, air defense systems that could have gone to Ukraine. The cupboard is bare.